Once again we return to Elveron and the misadventures of the Evensong Questing Guild. To reintroduce an old foe, we must return to the dungeon architect Alphonse de Bois first, and the Guild of Unending Challenge. Following the theft of the Eye of Cars, Alphonse fell on hard times, coming under ridicule for how poorly defended his gem was, and for how low-standing a guild could achieve the feat so easily. They were thrown out of the guild to fend for themselves. As such, Alphonse, newly destitute and cowed, moved to Darksnow, a town of ill repute filled with hives of thieves and fought over by gangs. The lord of the town enjoys the conflict so as to shelter his identity as a vampire, and thus allows the chaos to fuel his hunt. Alphonse, meanwhile, became a blacksmith and armourer with his daughter Alice to make the most of this conflict. Here he designed armour and weapons for each of the various factions, and even for the lord himself. This, however, slowly drew the ire of those who realized he sold to all sides. This pushed him further and further into the clutches of the Lord of Darksnow. He designed for him a sprawling complex called the Gauntlet, filled with terrifying trials, meeting the Lord as a reward, the offer of a great boon. Unbeknownst to the few victors, it was to become part of the Lord's feast. Once the grind had proven its success, Alphonse sought his revenge and wrote a letter to the Evensong Guild. "Oh, dear adventurers, I am impressed at your recovery of the Eye of Cars. Perhaps you would join me and Lord Sven von Barenheim at Darksnow Keep for a magnificent feast to celebrate your success. I would love to know how you managed to escape the dangerous traps and tricksy goblins there. In kind regards, Alphonse de Bois." The letter arrived in Evensong a fortnight later from a hooded man riding a dark carriage. The adventurers, foolish as they are, eagerly took to the invitation, not understanding the danger, and boarded the carriage as it took them to the scattered hive of Darksnow. As the driver dropped them at the outskirts of Darksnow, they leapt from the carriage. I suppose now would be a good time to remind you of our cast of the Evensong Adventurers Guild. The first to exit is the acrobatic Astrid Airsong, leaping out onto the landing on their hands. Wooden legs kicking in the air until they cartwheel to a stop, and let their talking demonic sword, Derek, smell the air, its red eye twitching in further. The next to exit is Delphine, stepping gingerly on the cobbles, brandishing an old oaken staff. The sorceress kept her dark face veiled as she observed the blackened buildings before her. Following her is the swordsman Deus, carefully checking his shadow as he adjusted his spectacles, nearly dropping his longsword as he stumbled off the carriage. He dusted himself down and pulled out a book of the city to observe. Following after, with a jingle of the bells on her cornrows, is Octavia, clad in plated steel, carefully fingering her purse, testing its weight. Satisfied, she took the time to take in her surroundings. Finally, using his cane to guide him, Dexter Darkfang stepped off, adjusted his monocle, top hat, and scraggly beard, and walked off down a street, like he knew the place, forcing the others to follow, stumbling in tow. It was not long before the new arrivals were well known to everyone there, and Astrid found themselves pickpocketed of her magic sword. They had only discovered it had gone missing when they found it down an alleyway they wandered into, rammed halfway through the cut purse's chest in a pool of blood. Astrid collected the blade and told it off.
You know you shouldn't run away, Derek. It's not very responsible.
I was taken, you fool! I rescued myself and you abandoned me!
Derek glowered.
Now that's just being dramatic.
They ventured on, finding themselves in Blood Moon territory rather quickly. The gang, one of 4 major in the city, was known for its nighttime brawls that gave them their name. A few gang members, mid-murder of a splinter-tooth rogue, had come into the wrong bar, turned up at their presence, and made note of where they headed. They walked past a religious building, seemingly abandoned, or at least avoided, noting the black and white mask above its door. Deus remarked it was the domain of a trickery god, but no one paid much heed. Finally, they arrived at the large gates that led towards the dark spire of the Lord's residence. A guard blocked their passage with a polearm.
"Invitation, please,"
he commanded. They presented the letter from Alphonse, and the guard grunted and opened the gate.
"Good luck passing the gauntlet. If you make it, the Lord will meet you in his solar."
Dexter snatched the invitation back and smirked.
"I'm sure it won't be too long,"
and led them through into the labyrinth. Meanwhile, Alphonse had learned of their arrival whilst testing a new armoured suit. Pressing a button on the glove, it sent out a spark, shocking him, making his ears ring. Perfect, he thought, and set about completing it with haste. Alphonse then crept to his window and looked down as figures walked into the gauntlet, sniggering as he contemplated their demise. Meanwhile, Astrid danced ahead and following winding passages down until they were met by a towering robot with a police hat and truncheon.
"Target acquired."
It turned and leapt towards her, cudgel swinging. Astrid dodged once, twice, jumped onto the gigantic truncheon and ran up it as Delphine rounded the corner and shot off a blast of energy. Astrid climbed onto its back as Deus and Octavia rushed it together, fending off its quick strikes. It slammed into Deus, sending him flying, wind knocked out of him.
Watch out!
Deus called as the robot rounded on Octavia. Dexter came round the corner to barely block the strike on her and was taken out on the backswing himself. Astrid jammed Derek into its back and it roared, trying to pull her off it. Dexter saw double as Deus, despite being on the ground, rounded the corner and slammed into it, ripping open the steel. It crumpled on his blade and fell down, Astrid screaming with her sword embedded in its neck as it crashed. She stepped off, relieved, looked at the dais in front of her, then at the dais on the floor, and said,
I didn't know you had a twin dais.
I don't, he replied, looking at his pair as it rounded the next corner without acknowledging them, and disappeared.
That was spooky,
Delphine muttered. Too right, answered Octavia.
A doppelganger, perhaps. An illusion? Certainly friendly, at least.
Deus muttered to himself.
Did anyone get a good look at them?
Delphine asked, but to a chorus of the negative. They elected to move on, figuring they might encounter this mysterious person again. They dubbed him Deuce for now. As they meandered through the maze, they found themselves dodging traps through a mixture of Deus's caution, Dexter's investigation, and just letting Octavia walk forward and seeing if anything happened. 2 police bots, 17 spike tracks, 42 pits, 12 flame traps, 1 cheese under a box, Astrid nearly fell for, and a swinging giant axe coming from the wall later, they finally found the gate to the castle, guarded, annoyingly, by a minotaur. The beast stepped forward, battle-axe in hand, grunting at their arrival. Octavia banged against her shield as its hooves scraped the floor.
Come at me!
She screamed as it charged, bounding forwards and clattering into her shield. Delphine blasted it in its side, sending it reeling backwards. Astrid kicked out its legs, knocking it down, as Dexter plunged his rapier deep into its skull. It railed a guttural cry before falling still. "Dumb beast," Octavia murmured. Deus opened the large gates, and together they looked upwards to the dark spire. Alphonse, watching on, threw the contents of his dresser to the floor in anger, and went to find his lord. As they marched up the stairs and knocked on the large wooden doors, they creaked open, with a ghostly-looking butler waiting for them. "Welcome," he said, and guided them indoors.
Spooky.
Astrid commented, looking at the Gothic decor. "Lord von Barenheim is a rather prestigious individual. His family have held this house for centuries. I believe he himself is unnaturally elderly, so we should not insult the decor," Deus warned her.
Okay, Brainbox,
Astrid replied. They were guided upstairs to some large rooms where the butler requested they get changed for their master's dinner. The boys were presented with tight tuxedos, and the girls with obscenely outdated and frilly dresses that doubled their size. Poor Astrid was asked to wear heels despite her wooden legs ending in blades, not feet, and she would have had no way of keeping them on. Octavia muttered about how unprotective it all was. Delphine muttered about how bright and girly it was, especially for a Gothic castle, and Astrid repeatedly tripped on the heels that made absolutely no sense. As they exited their respective rooms, the boys stepped out gracefully to meet the girls at the top of the stairs. They saw the girls, burst out laughing, and Deus yelped as Astrid tripped, fell into Deus, and they tumbled down the stairs together with her hard wooden knee in an unfortunate place. By the time they had dusted themselves off, the butler took them to the dining room. Sat present to the left was Alphonse and his daughter, with the head of the table notably empty as the butler guided each of them to their seats. "My lord," Deus bowed. Alphonse laughed. "I am not Lord von Barenheim's son. I am his architect, Alphonse de Bois," he replied. My apologies, sir." "What are your names?" Alphonse asked. They said them in turn, Alphonse nodding at each. "I've been rude, sorry. This is my daughter, Alyssa. She works as my apprentice." "A pleasure," Deus said to her. At that moment the doors opened, and in comes a tall, languid man with greased back hair and a dark black cloak joined by a ruby star brooch. "Welcome, my adventurers. I hope your journey was safe." They paused at the word, suitably miffed, but electing to say nothing to not offend. Delphine smacked her hand over Octavia's mouth to stop her going into a rant. They all nodded instead. Good. My architect here has been wondering quite intensely how you managed to defeat not one, but two of his designs, relatively easily, too," the Lord murmured. "They were supposed to be difficult?" Valentine asked to Alphonse's internal rage.
To be honest, I thought it was really kind of you to host a music festival for us.
Astrid smiled.
A music festival? What do you mean?
Alphonse cried.
Well, DJ Gobbo was leading Glaston Goblin. It was an absolute blast, let me tell you.
Astrid kept on.
You mean to tell me that instead of butchering you on sight, they decided to host a party for you?
Alphonse seethed.
Well, they did try to roast Deus on a spit. Hey, I thought we agreed not to talk about that.
Deus muttered. Well, at least they had some sense. Alphonse smirked.
But Deus, well, Fantine traded him for a pretty rock.
She put in.
But, Delphine traded him for a pretty rock.
She put in. Alphonse exploded. A rock! When I got my hands on those cretins! Alice settled him down and asked the party to excuse her father as she took him outside. The feast arrived shortly after, and the lords sat watching them tuck into their food, quietly sipping on a dark wine. When asked why he wasn't eating, he explained that at his age he had a smaller stomach and would eat later, but was happy that they were enjoying the feast. Dexter thought that this was odd, but kept himself quiet. Everyone slowly stopped, however, as Deuce crept behind the lord, blade raised, and was about to slice him open when Deus shouted, "Watch out!" The lord turned as the blade crashed into the table instead. He whipped around and struck Deuce with a dagger, but the doppelganger faded from the touch as if ethereal. Deus's eyes widened. Could it be a phantom? Lord Sven turned and thanked them for their aid, saying that they would be rewarded for helping him defeat the assassin. He told the group that he would retreat to his quarters to rest, and suggested that they each bed down in the rooms prepared for them. They agreed to spend the night and went off to their rooms, thinking it nice that they got one each. While they were asleep, Astrid got a knock on her door. Sleepily, she put on her legs and opened it to find the lord there. "Hello, Astrid."
Oh, hi, Lord Van Barnheim.
She yawned in response. "Call me Sven. Can I come in?"
I guess it is your house. What's up?
She asked him. He turned, stepping inside. "I was just thinking about the day and how brave you are and how enchanting you are," he soothed.
Well, that's very kind of you, but it's a bit weird to tell me now.
"I apologize. I just could not let you go without seeing how utterly entranced by you I am." His eyes glittered and turned red. Astrid's pupils narrowed down to a dot. Sven placed a hand on her arm and pushed against the wall, slowly, his other hand reaching to her neck. "Well, aren't you a snack? Shall I continue?"
Yes, master.
Astrid toned, absent. The vampire moved in and sunk his teeth into her neck, and she gasped as he started to drain her. Meanwhile, placed beside the door, the cursed sword Derek glared at the creature, used all of its deadly might to force itself into the air, and flung itself into the vampire's back. Derek screamed.
Only I am allowed Astrid's blood.
The vampire arced its back in pain as the sword started to exsanguinate him. His charm on Astrid failed for a moment, enough for her to notice the situation, and she drove upwards with her knee, making him stumble backwards, and then stamped the point of her leg through his heart as the sword tumbled aside. The vampire froze for a moment, impaled on a stake, sort of, and shuddered as his clawed hand fell limp to his side.
Guys, we have a situation here.
Astrid screamed. With this she woke up half the castle, and soon everyone had rushed to her aid. Deus exclaimed.
You killed the Lord? Why would you do that? It was an accident.
Astrid screamed back.
How is this an accident?
Deus pointed at the sword, the pool of blood, and the leg in his chest.
He bit me.
He bit you? Octavia asked. Delphine smirked.
Kinky.
Octavia slapped her.
I believe what she is getting at by my observations is that the Lord is a vampire.
Dexter stepped in.
And if her leg is to move, he may come back and kill us all. Perhaps that was his intention to begin with.
You are saying that this was a trap all along?
Deus asked.
Yes, genius.
Delphine muttered.
How are we going to get my leg out of here?
Astrid exclaimed.
I think we need to leave it in there, to be honest.
Delphine suggested. Astrid only glared back.
Unhelpful.
Eventually, they elected to break a bedpost and shoved that in, replacing Astrid's now bloody leg. As they stumbled around, they hastily left the city, leaving the lordship to Alphonse de Bois, who parted further now to destroy the Evensong Adventurers with his new-found power. As they sat in the carriage, Astrid looked rather tense, and Deus wilted. Dexter turned to Astrid.
What's up with you?
Astrid turned and said,
I just realized I killed someone. Well, technically, you've killed things before.
Delphine responded. Astrid glared.
That's not helping.
I mean, if it helps, he was already dead. And a monster, so not really a someone.
Dexter uttered, soothing Astrid.
I thought he was quite tasty.
Derek laughed as everyone proceeded to glare at him.
What about you?
Octavia turned to Deus.
I just realized who Deuce is. Who?
It's me. From the future. And here ends another Evensong Adventurers Guild misadventure. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you by the campfire next time.